more and more companies were becoming commoditized. There's not a lot of differences between products and services. So you really have to differentiate yourself. And then we were moving into the information overload age. So when there's so much information coming to people, they mostly tune it out. So how do you get them to tune in? Well, just like with stories, they will tune in with metaphors and analogies, which in a way are micro stories, because they're very evocative of feeling, they're very visual, and they're very memorable. So it was a confluence of events that made me think, aha, there's a book here.
Hey everybody, I'm Ken Newhouse, and I'm going to welcome you to the Get Clients Now podcast, the show where high-growth consultants and professionals come to access the newest and most effective methods and systems for online marketing, advanced sales and persuasive communication strategies, and automated marketing funnels. And if you're wondering if the Get Clients Now podcast can help you get more high-value clients, enjoy more sales, build a massive tribe, and make more money, you're absolutely going to love this show.
Newhouse's work completely blows everything else that we've ever done with Google out of the water.
I have been looking for a way to grow my presence online, and what I've viewed from Newhouse's work was something that certainly is faster than anything I've seen before.
He says he's going to do something and he does it. He does it in the time frame that he says he's going to do it in. It's exciting when you talk about the results that you're going to get, and you can believe his word because he follows it up with action.
The Newhouse is direct, he's to the point, he tells you what's on his mind, and he backs his words up. From what I know now, from working with him, he's passionate about his work, and he backs it up 100%.
What I like best is you offer something that no one else has out there, which is a pretty comprehensive approach about marketing a system.
If somebody asks me should they use Newhouse's team, absolutely, because you're going to get the important information that you need very, very quickly.
On the internet, on the different marketing techniques, I've never experienced anything like this.
I would definitely recommend Ken Newhouse for someone who's serious about growing their business. I think that your results based on the numbers would at least double the sales in a very short time frame.
Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here from kennewhouse.com, and I want to welcome you back to the Get Clients Now podcast, where the one-size-fits-all marketing model is dumb, the client-centric business model is king, and leading experts share strategies and methods that you can use to accelerate brand acceptance, skyrocket your significance in the marketplace, and elevate your status so you can build your tribe with certainty. This is episode number 355 of the Get Clients Now podcast, and on today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Ann Miller. Ann's one of the most recognized, most sought-after, most in-demand thought leaders on the subject of using metaphor and story so you can create more effective and persuasive sales presentations, communications, and copy. Everybody knows that Ann's books, her first book, Metaphorically Selling, and The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, that's her most recent book, which is actually a revision and an update of that first book, Metaphorically Selling. Everybody knows that Ann's books have literally set the standard for teaching you how to become a more effective, more persuasive communicator, and for teaching you how to sell more of your products and services consistently in any economy using metaphors and story. Now, what you might not know, however, is that Ann has become one of the most in-demand sales and communication strategy trainers and consultants on the planet. And on today's show, you are in for the treat of your life. With the Chinese coronavirus wreaking havoc on our economy, it's become more challenging than ever to cut through the clutter and noise in the marketplace and bridge that trust gap with prospects so you can sell more of your stuff. In fact, so you can sell any of your stuff. It's more difficult than ever to achieve top-of-mind status and relevance in the marketplace, to actually be remembered, to stay relevant in your prospects' minds and make things happen, especially if you're unable to deliver your sales message better than everybody else. And today, in light of the current situation we're in, one of the biggest challenges you're going to face occurs when you forget that in spite of all that you know about your business, in spite of all your expertise and experience doing what it is that you do, it is often very difficult to paint a clear, memorable, and compelling mental picture for prospects that you're pitching. So, if you're like me and if you're like my most successful clients, you've probably asked yourself, how can I deliver a really complex sales message in a way that my prospects easily understand? How can I create and deliver a magnetic and irresistible presentation that literally gets prospects to whip out the credit card and give me money? I've been a direct response internet marketing consultant and copywriter for 21 years now, over 21 years in fact, and one of the most effective methods that I've found for achieving that is through using metaphors and stories in my sales copy and in my presentations. And on today's episode, you're going to sit through what is a literal masterclass for how to use metaphors and stories so you can become magnetic and irresistible to your perfect prospects. You're going to learn how to create powerful metaphors you can start using immediately to convert more prospects into paying clients. And when you can do that, you can start selling more, like right now, as we climb our way out of this recession China has so conveniently dumped in our lap. Now, I will readily admit that the interview that I did with Ann was absolutely just a blast. I had a tremendous amount of fun. And I say that because I've literally paid thousands and thousands of dollars to attend seminars. In fact, some of these multi-day seminars, I've spent over $10,000 to attend. And in some of those instances, I didn't get nearly as much actionable value as I did for my interview with Ann Miller. So I'm not going to do an introduction today. I'm not going to answer any questions. What I want to do is I want to run through Ann's bio, and then we're going to go ahead and welcome her on the show because the show is that good. The content is that good that I want to get you into this as quickly as possible so you can see for yourself. This is absolutely going to transform your business and your results, especially right now in the heart of this coronavirus recession. Speaker, seminar leader, author, and coach, Ann Miller helps people in high-stakes situations with the strategic thinking and skills they need to close a deal, nail a presentation, or wow a crowd. Both Fortune 500 firms like Citi and Goldman Sachs, as well as small businesses and startups, have experienced her original and high payoff programs. Featured frequently in print and online, Ann is the author of 4 books, the latest being The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, The Power of Metaphors to Sell, Persuade, and Explain Anything to Anyone, and her popular free Metaphor Minute newsletter is available on her website. And so with that, if you guys are ready, let's roll. Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here, and I want to welcome you to this episode of the Get Clients Now podcast. And on today's episode, we've got Miss Ann Miller. Ann is not only a master communications instructor, coach, consultant, but she's also a multiple-time best-selling author. Having read your books multiple times, I am honored to have you on the show today. So on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, I want to welcome you to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great, and thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Guys, you guys are in for a really big treat. And so I think a lot of you guys probably know about Ann's work, at least her books. Maybe Metaphorically Selling, that's the first book. And then you've got The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, which is kind of a run-up, like a second edition of that, a more in-depth edition, Ann?
Right. It has an additional section of 25 stories of real people who've used metaphors or analogies to help them get what they need in sales.
Okay, and so guys, I have to say, this is one of the books, actually both of them, but The Tall Lady is an updated version. This is a book, it's not just a book that you read. It doesn't just have quaint stories and metaphors. It is a workbook, and I feel so confidently in the quality of this book and that I'm going to guarantee your book so that anyone who's listening, any members of the Get Clients Now Nation, they're going to buy your book, they're going to read it, not just read it, they're going to actually fill out all the worksheets that you have in there. It's, like I said, a workbook. Use the information you've given them. They're going to benefit both financially and feel like it's an unbelievable investment of their time, effort, and money that they put into it. And it's really underpriced as far as I'm concerned, the value they get out of it. And if they can't say that, email me at customerservice@kennewhouse.com. Tell me, and I will buy the book from you. Now, if it's a digital book, obviously I'll just give you the money for it. But I feel that confidently that this is one of those books that you have to have in your library if you're in business to make a profit on purpose, as me and old Dan used to say. And if you just want to persuade people, ethically, obviously. So thank you, Ann, for writing the book. I know there was a lot of work that went into this, obviously, by looking at it and reading it as I have. It's a tremendous amount of work that went into this.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, too. It's a lot of fun.
A lot of fun to read. But anyway, if you could, take a minute or two. The first couple of questions I ask every guest. Take a minute or two, and we'll dive into this more as we go. I've got a list of questions that I have for you, and then I don't always stick to my list of questions because sometimes I get wrapped up in the conversation and I just try to engage with my guests. But if you could give us a backstory, take a minute or two. Tell us how you went from wherever it was that was kind of your starting point and brought you to where you are today. Because like I said before, you're a multiple-time best-selling author and you're one of the leading premier communication and persuasion coaches and consultants and presenters, not only in America, but on the planet.
Wow. Thank you. I was originally an English teacher, and then I left after a couple of years, and I wanted to see what business was like. So I got into the business world, but to my utter amazement and blow to my ego, I actually failed the McGraw-Hill editing test. It was devastating. So I couldn't get a job until I got a job as a secretary because I could type. And it led to a succession of jobs in Wall Street, in advertising, in the media world, in the consulting world, until I really found my niche, which is when someone took me to a seminar and I saw somebody on the stage teaching a seminar on personality styles. And I sat there and I said, man, I'm in the wrong field. I want to do what he's doing and I can do it better. And so I switched into the training industry at that point. And because of my experience, I was living in New York and had dealt with the finance industry and the media industry and the technology industry. It made sense to go after them as a customer base. And it was very successful and it got me all over the world. And the way I got to the book is I was teaching a presentation skills course and talked about metaphors and analogies in passing. And it was at Business Week, and someone in Business Week said to me, gee, that's really interesting. Is there a book on this topic? And I thought for a moment and I said, not yet. And that's when I decided to write the book. Because I thought that metaphors and analogies were remarkable tools of persuasion, influence, and explaining. And people in sales who need to be good communicators weren't consciously or intentionally recognizing that fact, that if you could become a master of metaphor, you could very dramatically affect sales cycles, business relationships, even personal relationships. So that's what got me going about this. And then I spent about a year doing research and looking for stories from salespeople and from the media to use as examples in the book. So it's not a theoretical book. It is definitely meant for people who sell, persuade, or explain things to other people to get a result.
And when you talked about the book, the first book is Metaphorically Selling, and then The Tall Lady with the Iceberg it's like the second edition of that. It's much more in depth, and then you have all those examples. You said like 25 new stories that you have in there, like real life stories.
Right. So I did metaphorically selling some time ago, and then I had accumulated so many stories that I just felt it was time to revise the book. And also I didn't love the title. And then I thought, all right, I'll call it The Tall Lady with the Iceberg. I know you're going to ask me, where does that come from?
Yes.
Because one of the things about metaphors and analogies, just like stories, is that they are visual. They are very evocative. And I made that point in my seminars. I would say, for example, there's a point in the seminar where I actually show an image of a metaphor for some other reason. And I said to the group, and I'm tall, I'm nearly 6 feet tall. I said, years from now, we'll be walking down the street and you'll see me and you'll say, oh, I remember you. You won't remember my name, but you will remember that I was the tall lady with the iceberg, because we remember visually.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where the idea for that came from. And then, of course, the subtitle is the same: The Power of Metaphors to Sell, Persuade, and Explain Anything to Anyone. And then because I had all these stories, I decided to revise the whole book.
That's interesting. And so one of the other questions, Anne, that I ask is, you might have already answered this, but I just want to make sure, was there an individual or a circumstance or even a book? This is how I find a lot of good books from time to time, that really set you off and triggered it? Or was it that one instance that you mentioned that kind of led you in the direction you've taken now?
It really was that one instance. I had worked at a magazine, and years later, the publisher said to me, when you hear something once, it's interesting. When you hear it twice, it's more like a trend. You hear it 3 times, you're onto something. So that woman's question about, gee, is there a book on this, was once. Then I became very aware of how metaphors and analogies were being used every place I turned. I said, this is something people need. And also at the same time, more and more companies were becoming commoditized. There's not a lot of differences between products and services. So you really have to differentiate yourself. And then we were moving into the information overload age. So when there's so much information coming at people, they mostly tune it out. So how do you get them to tune in? Well, just like with stories, they will tune in with metaphors and analogies, which in a way are micro stories, because they're very evocative of feeling, they're very visual, and they're very memorable. So it was a confluence of events that made me think, aha, there's a book here and a need.
So, Anne, when you and I were talking, you mentioned in one of our communications via email that you were, and I got it wrong, I said cabaret dancer, but you were a cabaret singer. I want to know about that before we go into the questioning, because I'm intrigued by that. So give us a little backstory on the cabaret experience.
Well, I wasn't a cabaret singer per se. Being a cabaret singer was always one of my great fantasies. I wanted to be up on the stage and belt out a song like Barbra Streisand. I'm sure you have your own secret fantasy of what you would like to do, maybe be an astronaut or something. I don't know. So I discovered this group in New York called The Singing Experience, which takes about a dozen people and over the course of a month helps them develop songs to perform in a cabaret. And on the 5th week, you perform in a real cabaret in New York, and the audience of 150 people are all the friends and family of the performance. So it's a very supporting audience. And it's really a lot of fun. You have a professional accompanist, you wear those phony diamond earrings, you wear boas, you get all dressed up. It's a hoot. And I was able to do that. I did it 3 times. I had so much fun. So I realized my passion of singing from the stage, although I must say, it's a good thing I didn't stay there. The first night I had 30 people, the second night 4, and the third night 2, which was an indication that maybe I should keep my day job. So I did. But it was a peak experience to have done that.
So the people that came to the show weren't just friends and family. It could be anybody from...
Oh, no. They were friends and family.
Okay.
Of everybody in the show.
Okay.
So everybody got applause. Everybody got hoots, even if you were terrible. Although nobody was terrible, she was really able to pull talent out of everyone, which was quite remarkable.
Those are memories.
Yes, wonderful memories.
So let's do this. Let's dive into the interview, because I've been chomping at the bit now for... Well, we started talking about this about a month ago or so, but I look at it as an opportunity, and I've openly admitted this many times on the show. I have guests on the show pretty much every time that I've obviously read their work or watched their videos or studied their material. So a lot of the questions are selfish on my behalf, and it just so happens that a lot of these questions that I ask actually appeal to and are similar questions to what the audience would ask. But take a minute or 2, 3 minutes, whatever you need. Let's talk about metaphors and, how we know how to use them and why they're so effective at explaining and persuading and selling stuff, why they make it so much easier to persuade, why they make our sales process much more effective.
Metaphors have certain qualities. And by metaphors, I mean analogies, similes, metaphors, and you can even use analogies and stories and props as metaphors. So it's a very loose definition. But metaphors have certain qualities that are essential to persuasion. They establish common ground with somebody else. They are easy to understand. They're highly evocative. People see it. The right brain just lights up, just the way it does when you tell a story. They are visual. And we are visual beings. And they are memorable. They resonate, and they're memorable. They're easy to remember. You remember things like fiscal cliff. You remember things like that's a train wreck waiting to happen. You understand it. You understand it instantly. No matter how complex something is, as a Fortune magazine once wrote, if you can take the complex and make it simple, and then take the simple and make it meaningful. And metaphors do that. That's why they work. And the thing is, we talk metaphorically all the time. You do. You can't get through 3 sentences without using some kind of metaphoric language. But we do it unconsciously. And the point of the book is start doing it consciously, baby, because there's a wealth of selling and persuasion power in that. And a lot of money can drop to the bottom line when you use these things effectively. And so the book shows you how to do that.
And once you realized for the first time the power of metaphors to help you persuade and to sell and to communicate more effectively, what's the thing that really surprised you most? That first time you really got it, like the aha moment when you realized what you had here?
Well, it was the moment when that woman said to me, "This is really interesting. Is there a book on this?" And then I said, "Not yet." And then I became more aware, just like when you say you're going on a trip to Paris, suddenly every place you turn, you see articles on Paris. You hear about people who just came back from Paris. Well, suddenly everywhere I looked, everything I was reading, everything I was listening to, all the news commentators, sports all use metaphors and analogies. It's all over the place. It's like the air, and you don't even know it's there because you don't see it. So what the book does, it makes it visible to everybody about how universal this tool is in our communication process and how it can be used to help you get what you need.
That's exactly the same thing that happened to me when I was, I'm a direct response copywriter, and I was looking I always felt like there was something missing that I could learn, a skill set, tools that I could incorporate into my copywriting to make me a more effective copywriter. And I came across Story, and when I read someone's book, and then I started noticing that everybody was talking in stories and metaphors and the things you're telling me. And then I found your book. I didn't find your book until I was at a conference with Dan Kennedy. It was an influential writing workshop. And he actually recommended your book and said, you have to buy this book, as did Todd Brown. But I think this was back in 2008 or 2012. And it was Metaphorically Selling was the first one he recommended. And I didn't realize, I went back and read that book again, that I actually had both of your books. And so I'm like, wow, I don't have to buy this. I already have these. But Anne, what's your earliest memory of using metaphors to sell and persuade? Do you have a memory, like one that really stands out?
Yeah, I do, actually. Many years ago, I developed I left teaching and went into business. And I had a lot of friends who were still in teaching and said, oh, you're so lucky you got out. You were so brave. I could never do it. And I said, don't be ridiculous. Of course you can. And I put together a little 8-week workshop in my home. And then I wrote a book. And then a magazine got a hold of the booklet and heard about me and wrote up the book and wrote up the teachers who left teaching. And then I decided, then the New School in New York heard about it and said, would you do a seminar? So I have this seminar. I have this group of people, teachers, who were terrified to leave teaching. And I knew that they didn't think they could do it. And so I thought, how am I going to get them to appreciate the urgency of what they have to do? And so I used this metaphor, this analogy, as an opening to the workshop. And I said, let's imagine that I want you to think of something very sad for the moment. Someone you know is very sick and is going to die. Okay, someone close to you. Think about that. Now that's the bad news. The good news is there is a doctor. There's one doctor in the country that can save this person. Raise your hand if you think you would find that doctor. Well, of course, everyone's hand shot up. I said, okay, what would you do? And they started calling out what they would do. I'd go to my doctor. I'd go online. I'd go to the press. I'd go to my congressman. I'd go to the lab. All these suggestions came out. And then I said, well, let's say you went to your doctor and he was on vacation for 2 weeks. Would you wait until he came back and then did the next piece of research? Oh, no, I would do all these things simultaneously. And I said, bingo, that is exactly what you have to do if you want to change careers. You have to do all this networking, all this research, and do it simultaneously, and you will get a job. And that's what this workshop is going to help you do. That was that was a really powerful way to open up the workshop. And it worked. I had them in the palm of my hand for the next several weeks. So yeah, that was a turning point, I guess, when I realized the power of analogy and metaphor is just unlimited.
So Anne, once you left teaching and you went in and started this new career, this new path with teaching people how to persuade and sell using metaphor, then you wrote your first book. What was different or unexpected about that experience, that first book when it first came out? You were kind of surprised that this is happening.
A couple of things. One is that I got calls from people from different parts of the country saying, wow, this is really good. I use metaphors all the time. And this is terrific. I never saw anything like this. And then I got one of the best ones was from a professor at Columbia University who was teaching a course on entrepreneurship to engineers. And he asked me to come in and do a lecture based on the book, which was really cool.
Yeah.
The other thing I found really interesting was that the higher up the food chain you go in a corporation, CEOs love the book because they think conceptually, they think visually. They have to literally see which direction the company is going in. They have to motivate people. And they really like the book, which was kind of fun.
Okay, so I want to dive into the book now. I want to dive into some specific topics in the book. But you mentioned in the book, people confuse information with communication. And you brought up 2 points on that. Number one, they don't choose words carefully. And they inundate listeners with information. And I call that verbal vomit. That's not in your book, but I just added that on there. And number two, they speak from their point of view and not their listener's point of view. So based on that, I want you to comment on that. Give us your thoughts.
So there are really 2 or 3 things in there. One is people just think if I give you information, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You'll get it. And it's usually facts. This is up, this is down, this is sideways. We have to do this because of this. Very left brain, very logical. But people really need both. Well, there's 2 points there. One is you have to wrap up with that information. If you're doing data, fact, information, people are waiting for that to come to some kind of a conclusion. And what a lot of salespeople do is they forget to do the bottom line. You're in deep trouble. Okay, they don't do that bottom line. And if you can make it like bottom line, this is a patient that's dying, that just has more oomph to it than here are a lot of facts. So that's one point. That example of the teachers is a good example. I could stand on my head and say, look, it's really important that you network. It's really important that you research. And it's really important that you do these things simultaneously. Because in my head, I know that. My experience tells me that's true. But if you're in the group, it's not in your world. I have to connect to your world. And I have to do it in a way that you go, wow, that's true. I see that. And so that's why that elaborate opening works so well, because suddenly they get, yeah, that's what I would do. I would do things simultaneously. Oh, I see her point. On a very simple level, if I say to you, I met this amazing guy. I mean, he is just terrific. He is attractive and charming and talented. And he's just like George Jordan. I mean, you really like this guy. I mean, this fantastic guy. You're sitting there thinking, well, she obviously had a good time with this guy and she obviously liked him, but there's nothing happening in you that makes you particularly want to meet him. But if I said this guy was great, he's terrific, he's talented, he's philanthropic, he's just like Michael Jordan. Well, suddenly you have this recognition in your head, right? Even if you're not a sports person, you know generally that he's a good guy, that he was famous, and it's a positive evocation of feeling there, which would make you want to meet him. So it's being able to connect what you're saying with the experience of someone else, as opposed to just saying what you're saying and hoping logically they understand you. They'll hear the words. They hear the words. But does it resonate? The resonance comes from that right brain, not from the left brain.
People remember visually much, much easier and for much longer than they do audibly.
Right.
And so you talked in the book about, is there a best time to use metaphors versus times that are not? So you gave a long list, I think it was 10 questions, and I'll just give you a couple of them right now, and then I want to get your thoughts on this. But you mentioned that we get questions from our prospects and from existing clients, and the best way to handle these is not just to throw information at them like you just alluded to, but it's to respond to them in metaphor. And here's some examples of those questions. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you different from every other XYZ company? And the last example I'll just give you real quick is, why do I need to work with you?
Mm-hmm. Right. So metaphors and analogies can be used in any phase of the sales process. So if someone says, what do? You could say, well, I recruit people. I hire people. I get people jobs. Or you could say, I'm basically the Sherlock Holmes of the recruitment world. All right. Now, those are two different answers. One is generic, and 10 other competitors could say the same thing. And the second one is visual, evocative, memorable, and you're probably the only one saying that. So in positioning yourself, you can find a metaphor. In differentiating yourself, you can find a metaphor. In handling objections, that's the greatest place to give your answer using a metaphor or an analogy. Can I tell you one that works really well?
Absolutely. Run with it.
So a lot of people in business run up against the objection of, well, you guys are all the same. Recruitment's recruitment, technology's technology, IT service is IT service. You're basically all the same. So so it might come down to price. So the person who's the buyer is sitting there just seeing everything is the same. So you have to break through that. And by you standing there saying, no, we're different. I promise you we're different. We're terrific. We're wonderful. We're great. It falls on deaf ears because he's already got the mindset and the image in his mind that you're the same. So to change that, go back into his world. And a very good technique works, because I've heard this works a lot with clients, which is ask them if they have children. And most people have kids. And if they don't have kids, they have nieces or nephews. They were kids. All right. They have a brother or sister. Most people have kids. And you say, let me ask you a question. Those are both your kids. Do they have the same personality? There isn't a parent in the world that would say, yes, they do. No, every parent says, oh, God, no. One is very creative and sweet and adoring, and the other is very introvert. I don't care what they say. All I want them to do is to see that they have two children who both children, but nevertheless, very different personalities. And then I would ask, would you rely on them for the same things? And they go, oh, of course not. Little Jimmy was always there to help me with such, and little Susie is always there to do this. That's all you got. All you have to do is get them to see their own children. And then you link back to your point. And you say, look, just as both of those kids are your kids, but they have different personalities, they bring different strengths to the party, you rely on them for different things. The same thing is true with our clients. They have the same choices to make that you do, but they see the differences between us and everybody else. And they come to rely on us for certain specific things. And this is why they buy us and why you should also. Do you see how that worked? By opening up first I have to open up his mind to the notion that because it looks the same, it's not. And then I can bring them around to how we're better. So that's what I mean about you've got to get inside the head of the other person.
Guys, right there, that in and of itself, if we just turn everything off right now and we end the interview, which obviously we're not going to do, that one bit of advice, that one example right there was worth everything for you to be on the show today. And again, I'm going to run back to the point of buy her book, invest in it. I'm telling you, this will transform your ability to sell, persuade, and influence people, obviously ethically. If you can't say that, which you're not going to be able to say, but if you can't say that, email me, customerservice@kennewhouse.com. I will buy the book from you. We'll be good, but I'm telling you, it's that good. So, Ann, in the book, you mentioned that the human brain and that our audience or audiences actually crave metaphor. I want you to talk about that for a minute or two. Why is it that the human brain would rather hear communication in the form of metaphor and story versus just hearing data? You got the guy up there with the PowerPoint with his back turned to you, throwing stat after stat. You got people in the audience who are playing on their phones. They're looking for a hit of dopamine, playing with an app or whatever. So what is it about metaphor that people crave and it really keeps them locked in onto your message?
Okay. You've heard the expression, a committee buys, a committee sell. Yes? So all of us have left brains, right brains. Left brains really crave information. I'm not saying that you don't give people information. You have to give them facts. You have to be logical. You have to back up your statements with facts. And it has to add up. And the left brain wants to know, okay, you've given me a lot of information. What is the point? Okay, they want that. Mm-hmm. But they also need the right brain. I mean, there is actually a muscle a bridge that goes from right and left. They work together. The right brain and the left brain is like Joe Friday, that detective that always wanted the facts from old television days. But the right brain is more like a Robin Williams. That's the creative, playful, emotional part of you, the imaginative part of you, the visual part of you. So that they need to feel it. They need to see it. Okay, they need to see. And so you can tell people something, but then help them to see it. I always say to people, okay, when you're structuring a presentation, all right, what is the information you want to present? Get that down. Okay, then how are you going to make them see it? Are you going to use an example? Are you going to use a metaphor? Are you going to use an analogy? How are you going to make them see it? Metaphors and images are natural, and analogies use imagery. And that's why it appeals to them. So that when you go to buy a car, for example, or a house, the left brain says, oh, this is a good house. It has just the number of bedrooms I need. It has just the storage. It has the basement. It's the right price. Or it's not the right price. It's really very high. But, oh, I love the view. That's the right brain. You have to satisfy both. And metaphors and analogies do that because they give the visual, the evocative, the emotional context to the logical information.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, and we're going to talk about it in just a minute, but Anne's got a formula, a framework you can use to be able to create metaphors that are very, very effective, very powerful. But before we get to that, I'm going to read a quote from the book, and then I just want to get your thoughts on this. You said in the book, the trick to making a winning metaphor lies in figuring out which of your clients' photos you know something about, enough to trigger an explosion of association in his or her mind. So comment on that, and then we're going to move in towards talking about the framework that you've created to make it. It's kind of like just add water, plug and play, paint by numbers. But let's touch on this first.
You have to know something about them. And even if you don't know anything, even if you're meeting them for the first time, there are certain things you can assume about other people. Everybody travels, well, until this virus thing, everybody travels, has travel experience. Everybody likes to eat food. Everybody had a first day of school. Everybody has relationships with somebody, people, children, parents, spouses. Everybody is in business. And also, you know their industry. If you're in the tech industry, you can take your analogies from technology. If you're in the media industry, take it from media. If you're in the food service industry, take it from that. You do know something about people. You also know that they know culture, the popular culture, politics, although stay away from politics. Politics, sex, and religion don't do too well when you're in sales mode. But there's a lot of common ground that you could take your metaphors or analogies from. You just have to think, what do I know about this person? And what can I compare the point I'm trying to make to something in his or her world that he can say, aha, I get it. I understand.
That's awesome. And it does, I just want to throw this in. It does require that you do your homework before you meet with the prospect or meet with the client to be able to use this effectively. And Anne goes through, like I said, her book is not a book you read. It's a book you read, and then it's a workbook at the same time, and it will literally transform your ability to sell and persuade, make you a much more profitable and successful business owner or professional or whatever you do. Even if you're not using this to sell more stuff, it'll help you become a much more effective communicator. And so, Anne, with that, you said also in the book that our brains are wired for the unexpected, and you said metaphors are, and I think you were giving the analogy that was related to Seth Godin's book, The Purple Cows. You said metaphors are verbal purple cows.
Right.
They work by taking the same old thing and catch your attention with a fresh new view of it.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, we're in coronavirus time, but I'll just give you an example. So Andrew Cuomo, as you know, has been on television a lot, giving updates every day. And they were talking about buying ventilators and how difficult it is to find ventilators. And he said, it's like being on eBay with 50 other states bidding on a ventilator. You see, you could relate to that.
Right.
Right? You didn't associate eBay with the coronavirus until he made the analogy.
Mm-hmm. So people notice what's different. And when you come out with an analogy or a metaphor, they go, oh, okay. They notice it. It's like going into a room full of everyone dressed in black and white. Someone walks in a red dress. Everybody sees the red dress and you notice it. So the analogies pop. Can I go back to something you said earlier about preparation? Absolutely.
Most people who are in sales hear the same things all the time and have the same obstacles, depending on your business. For one, it might be, how are you different? For another, it might be an objection. If you're a premium priced product, it might be, why should I pay so much money? I mean, there's nothing that really is new in a particular sales company that they haven't heard before. So you're right about preparing something in advance. A really smart thing to do is to sit down as a team and figure out what analogies and metaphors can be used at every stage of the process. But in terms of preparation, one of the biggest successes I ever had was I was early on in my career, and I had a shot at getting all the business of an advertising agency in Manhattan. And they put out a request for proposal. Everybody in the city, and there were a lot of people, including some large firms, came in to compete for their business. And one of the requirements was you had to have had an advertising agency in your portfolio of accounts. Well, I met all the specs, except I had no advertising agency in my portfolio of accounts, but I won the business. And I did it with a metaphor. And I knew that if I were going to win the business, I had to change the way they saw the specs, because otherwise I would lose. Now, this took me a few days to figure out. but I figured it out. And this is how it went. And this is a true story.
Yes, it's in the book.
Yeah, I went in to see them, and it was an executive vice president there. And I did my dog and pony show, and she said, but you have no experience in the advertising agency world. And I said, you're right. But let me ask you a question. You recently won the DHL courier account. Isn't that right? Yes, we did. Did you have any experience in the courier industry before that? And she said, no. And I said, right. But DHL didn't need you to have another courier in your portfolio. They just needed to know that you were the best damn advertising agency for them. Isn't that true? And she said slowly, yeah. I said, the same is true here. Okay. I don't have experience in the advertising agency world, but I do have experience in many other industries. I've learned them very quickly, just as I will learn the dynamics of your world. You just have to be sure I know everything about presenting. And I do. And I took that looking right into her eyes. And you know what she said? I mean, it was dead silence. Do you know what she said? Oh, that's all she said. Oh. And I got the business because I totally flipped the way she saw the specs, because she invalidated my right to have her business. DHL could have invalidated their right to be the agency. And they're in the position, because most agencies don't have competing accounts. So every time they go after an account, it's always the first, right? So that's what I mean. It took me a couple of days. I did a little research, but that really worked. And so I go back to what you said earlier, which is if it's really big, if it's important, if it keeps coming up all the time, it does pay to take the time to figure it out.
How did that feel, like viscerally in your gut, in your soul, when she responded just very simply by saying, oh, I mean, at that point, you knew you nailed it, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how'd that feel?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I knew I had her. It felt great. And they were an account for many years.
And she knew you had her at that point as well.
Yeah. And it wasn't hostile. That's the whole point. I didn't make her wrong. I just helped her to see it, to reframe the way she saw the race for her business. And that's what you're doing. You're not forcing anything. You're helping people reframe the way they see something. It's like those kaleidoscopes, you know, the things you turn the glass, you see it a different way. That's what you're doing. And I find it incredibly challenging and great fun to do that, because I'm sitting there going, okay, how do I make this guy see what I'm talking about? How do I make him understand? How do I get him to get it? And that's the fun of it.
Like I said at the very outset of the show, not only is this just an amazing book with tremendous value, it's fun. So let's do this, because this is, I think, a really important topic that I want to make sure we get to. You talk, you know, people are sitting here thinking and listening, and they're saying to themselves, this is great. I want to use metaphors. I'm thoroughly convinced Ann is the real deal. But how in the world do I create metaphors? I have no idea. Well, first and foremost, let me say this. She gives you a framework in the book, but let's just kind of breeze through that now. Not to be funny when I say this, I am literally touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to, there's no possibility I could ask all the questions that I want to ask based on her book. I am barely scratching the surface of what is in this book. But let's talk about the 4 steps for creating a winning metaphor. And if you could, take a minute or 2 for each step. And if you want me to cue you up on each one, I will. And if not, just run with it.
Okay. First of all, people shouldn't feel that this is a very difficult thing to do, because we talk in metaphors all the time. People who are saying, gee, I'm torn about what to do. I don't have the bandwidth to process this. That's a train wreck waiting to happen. It's apples and oranges, are talking metaphorically all the time. Okay. We all reach for analogies and metaphors to describe things. So that's number 1. But the 4-part process is, the first thing is to figure out what is the blind spot that somebody is having. What's the obstacle? So for the teachers that I had, you know, the analogy I gave before, I knew that they wouldn't feel that they could do this, that they could go out there because they've only been in school, right? And the second thing is, what do you know about these people? What do you know about these people? Again, with the teachers, well, they've been in school, but they have families, they have kids. One of the things I realized is they have families. Then the third thing is, okay, what can I use? What can I create that would, around family, that would be, what is this like? What would it be like in their world? And that's when I came up with the illness and the need to find the doctor. And then you have to relate it to them. So let me go to the DHL one to walk you through that, because that's more a business situation. So the problem was they thought they needed somebody with ad agency experience. That was the problem. I had to change that view, that requirement.
That was their blind spot.
That was the blind spot. If you didn't have agency experience, you were out. I had to change that. Second thing, what did I know about them? Well, I knew they're a public company. I mean, it was in the news. They had just won this account. I knew they handled lots of accounts, but I zeroed in on, I knew they had just won this account. Then 3, I had to create the analogy. And that wasn't hard to do once I came up with a DHL. Is you just have to step by step walk them through how it's parallel to their situation. But you don't stop there. You don't say, well, it's just like DHL. You didn't have experience and you won the account. You can't stop there. You have to go to the 4th step, which is related back to the point you're making, and say, and that's exactly the same here. Yes, I don't have advertising agency experience, but I have experience in many industries. I've learned many industries. I will learn your industries just as well. Just as you learn the DHL industry, you just have to be sure I'm the best damn presentation coach out there. So you get it back, and I am right.
You had to anchor it. Yeah, that's good.
Right. Well,
so
I was modeling what I was selling. You were looking for presentation training. Wasn't that a great presentation? Right. I was modeling what I was selling.
Absolutely. So, Ann, let me ask you this: if someone's trying to use a metaphor in the act of selling and persuasion, what are some of the common mistakes or ways people can mess this up?
I think there's a couple of mistakes. One is they don't relate it back. They'll say baseball is like life, and then they stop there. You have to relate it back. But the other mistake that people make is they stop at 1 or 2 ideas. This didn't just come to me. These don't just come to you right away. So let me give you an example of that. Years ago, I had a woman who worked on Wall Street, and she was promoting a new mutual fund. And it had a really long name to it, like a diverse equity, non sequitur, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, had 5 different words to describe the fund. And every time she would mention the fund, she would have to say those 5 long words. And I said to her, you can't do that. You're going to lose people. I said, tell me what the fund does. And she says, well, it's not too difficult. People invest their money and they leave it there for 15 years. And at the end, it appreciates. It goes becomes a larger asset. I said, okay, well, let's think a little bit. What is that like? What is something that you put away for a while and then at the end you get something? So then we thought, well, let's see. Baseball teams, they practice in the spring season and then they come out and they play. That didn't work so well. Then we thought, well, bears go into hibernation for the winter and they come out with cubs. We didn't quite like that. So we went through a few iterations until finally we hit on it. Okay. What is it that cocoons for a while and then emerges as an appreciated asset?
Caterpillar.
Exactly. And so we called it, well, it's the caterpillar when it's cocooning, but the appreciated asset is the butterfly. So she mentioned the fund with the 5 names first, explained what it did, and said, it's the butterfly fund. And for the rest of the talk, she just called it the butterfly fund. And everybody knew what she meant. At that time, there had to have been over 1,700 mutual funds available for purchase. Nothing else was called the butterfly fund. Do you see what I'm saying? So the mistake that people make is they stop too soon. They go, what is this like? What? Oh, it's like this. That doesn't work. What is it? That doesn't work. I can't come up with anything. Not true. If you keep going, you'll come up with something. And if you do it with somebody else, not just yourself, it's easier. Another example is I had a money manager who was pitching for business, and he said he was wonderful, and he did customer service, and they did performance analysis. I said, look, everybody says that, right? What do you do differently? Well, we give good customer service, and we're really best, and we're honest people. I said, everybody says that. And he was getting angrier and angrier. And I was intentionally making him angry, because when you get really angry, you burst out with something. And he said, so I kept saying, so how are you different? He goes, well, we're like architects. I said, keep talking. He said, we do the whole plan. We do everything. Other money managers just do bits and pieces like carpenters or electricians. I said, there's your story. There's your story. There's your differentiating story. So you have to stick with it and keep pushing and pushing and pushing until suddenly you pop out. It's like your mother who walks into a teenager's room and looks around and says, clean up this room. She comes back 5 minutes later, the room is still a mess. Comes back 10 minutes later, the room is still a mess. And she's so angry. She says, what do you think I am, your maid? It's you get to a point where it just pops out.
Right.
So I'm not saying everybody should get angry at everybody else, but what I'm saying is stay with it. Don't just settle for the first or second thing that comes out, because you'll probably get a better idea, a better analogy on the third or fourth one.
So, Ann, I've just got a few more questions, and I want to ask you this one because this one's been stuck in my mind for a while. But, like I said earlier, everybody knows that you're a best-selling author. I'm not sure how many people know that you're one of the leading experts and trainers in the world on communication, and certainly on metaphor. I would say you're probably the world's leading expert. But what's one thing that people typically don't know about you, but you'd really like them to know?
I get a real charge out of helping people think through what they're trying to communicate. I really do. And right now I'm concentrating more on coaching than I am doing group work. So I love working with people online. We work on the content of their presentation, and then we work on the visuals, we work on the storyline, and then we put it all together. And it's just really fascinating to do. And it's fun, and it's efficient, and it's what keeps my juices flowing. And we use metaphors or analogies wherever we can.
I think people that are listening right now can tell. I mean, if they're like me at all, which a lot of them are, and if they're like my most successful members, they can tell that you're an engaging, caring, how can I say this, highly qualified at what you do. And so I could easily see how someone could find you to be the perfect fit for them and working with them and helping them develop this method of communication for their business. I got a couple more questions. Here's the big one I want to ask. What's the one question that I didn't ask today, Ann, that I should have asked?
When we talk about metaphors and analogies, how do you use them in every phase of the call? We only mentioned a couple. And how do other things use? Because metaphors and analogies, you can use props, for example. People don't think to use props. You can use props. And if you're not comfortable using a prop, you can say, imagine that you had. Okay. Mm-hmm. But props work well. It's very, very visual. You can use cartoons. One of my favorite all-time cartoons to use to start a presentation is an old New Yorker cartoon where a man is coming back from lunch and the secretary is handing him a slip. And underneath she's saying, sir, while you were out, the paradigm changed. And then becomes the lead into, clearly the paradigm has changed for us today. Look at the coronavirus, right? But it's a great way to capture people's attention. The cartoon becomes a metaphor for what your whole speech is about. There's no limit to what you can use as metaphors and analogies. I guess that's what it is. There is no limit. It's limited only by your imagination.
Okay, and so based on that answer, what are some, in addition to your book, are there any I mean, I know you give, and there are so many exercises in this book that you can do. You don't have to do them all, but could you just rattle off one or two different exercises we could do to help us become more visual, to get our creative juices flowing, something you've outlined in the book?
Okay, well, I think one of the things you can do is read the financial pages, the op-ed pages, and the sports pages of a newspaper, either online or, actual papers. Those three areas are filled with metaphors and analogies every day. Every day. Op-ed pages are trying to persuade you to some point of view. They use analogies and metaphors constantly. Sports pages use them all the time. Financial pages use them to explain. And, the finance world is filled with bulls, bears, poison pills. It's all analogies and metaphor. So that you begin to see these around you and how they're used. You can also clip some of these and say, man, that's a really good analogy. Someday I'm going to use that. And you can adapt these things. So it's tuning up your antenna to the possibilities of where you see these things, that you can use them yourself.
So, Ann, if listeners actually want to buy your books, or if they want to take advantage of the free newsletter, it's an awesome newsletter you have. It's called the Metaphor Minute. It's on your website. How can they take action on that now? What are the best steps for them to take, not only to buy your book, The Tall Lady with the Iceberg, and then also the Metaphor Minute? Tell us about that.
The easiest way to get the book is to go to Amazon. That's it. The Metaphor Minute newsletter is on my website under resources. It's a free newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it always has a story about somebody who used a metaphor or an analogy in business in some way, shape, or form. Or sometimes I take it from the media or from the political world. But it is always it always winds up with, how could you use this? Where could you use this? So that's a popular thing to read, is the Metaphor Minute newsletter. And of course, I'm available for coaching. You just have to reach out to me at amiller@annmiller.com. And Ann is spelled with an E, amiller@annmiller.com.
Yeah, when I first actually did a Google search, I forgot to add the E, and I got a search of, was this lady a singer or an actress from the 1930s or 40s?
40s was a dancer.
Yes.
She was a tap dancer. She's very famous, actually. And anytime I would meet people, some people would say to me, "Oh, do you dance?" I got that question so often that I took tap lessons just to say, yes, I do. When I say about reaching out, there's a story, I think it's in the book, but it may not be. A lawyer called me up and said, I'm doing a case. It's a negligence case, and I need a metaphor or an analogy to really wow the jury, to drive home the negligence of this particular case. And it had to do with an ambulance that had poor safety belts in it, and the belt snapped and somebody got killed. And they knew all along that could happen. And so there was negligence against the company. And he said, I'm just looking for just the right analogy. And I said, let me think about it. And we thought about it, and then I came with it. And the gist of it was that this ambulance company was playing Russian roulette with its patients. They knew that belt could snap. But nevertheless, just like in Russian roulette, where there's a bullet that could kill you, they were willing to take that chance, and they should be held accountable. And he said to me after, he said, as soon as he brought up that Russian roulette analogy, he could see the jury change in his favor. So consulting on that is something I love to do, as well as consulting on presenting and selling. And I welcome that from the people who are listening.
But hey, listen, I appreciate you being on the show today. I think you far exceeded my expectations, certainly by a ton. And I am just thrilled with the interview you gave today. It's probably one of and I'm not just saying this, it's got to be in the top 5 that I've ever done.
It was great to be here. Thank you for letting me talk about my favorite topic in terms of helping people really get what they need and want.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, and you just really knocked it out of the park for us today. I really am thankful for that. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks, Ann.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Our objective with this podcast is to help you and your business stand out in the marketplace by crystallizing your messaging, marketing, and communications. On behalf of the whole Ken Newhouse team, thanks for listening.